president of Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, has pledged to crash the cost of cooking gas, LPG, warning that if distributors resist price reductions, he will sell directly to consumers. His refinery currently produces 2,000 tons, or 22,000 tons, I beg your pardon, of LPG daily, with plans to ramp up supply. However, the LPG market operators have raised concerns over a potential monopoly. Godwin Okoduwa, former chair of LCCI's LPG Group, criticized the move as monopolistic, urging collaboration instead. He noted that Nigeria's LPG market grew from 70,000 metric tons in 2007 to over 1.3 million in 2022 through joint efforts, not domination. As Dangote eyes direct fuel distribution in August, industry players advocate inclusive strategies over disruption. Bolarinwa Durojaiye, oil and gas technologist, joins me now for this conversation. It's a pleasure to have you in, Bolarinwa.
Hi, Joanna, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, a delight to have you in. And to echo the question on some people's minds, especially the marketers here, and in local lingua, not only you Wakacom, right? That's Dangote, directed to Dangote. What are your thoughts on people asking these kind of questions, especially with Dangote's involvement or proposed involvement in this sector?
There's so much to unpack in this situation, and my initial thoughts would be that, in the first place, it's a good problem to have. We are developing substantial domestic industrial capacity in this regard, specifically on the Dangote refinery side, and that's why the conversation is happening in the first place. So just kind of lay that foundation that it's a good problem to have, and at the end of the day, things will resolve themselves. Speaking directly to Alhaji Dangote's claim, or well, call it a threat to supply directly to consumers, the question you want to ask is, even with the PMS situation, is he able to sell directly to consumers? And we know that, at best, we have some sort of partnerships and upstream supply agreements there. So is he able to develop that kind of downstream, supply chain capability nationwide? I mean, I never say never, but what exists right now didn't happen in a day. You have about 500 distribution points concentrated mainly in the southwest area of the country. And like I said, there's so much to unpack because our per capita consumption of LPG as a country, Nigeria, is atrociously low. Even compared to some of our West African neighbors, it's really low, and it's ironic. We're suffering in the midst of plenty. We are, in terms of gas reserves, about the 7th largest globally. In terms of actual natural gas production, we're about the 17th largest globally. But somehow our domestic demand situation, especially in a per capita analysis, is really very low. It's not a good look. It speaks to our inability to afford the product, which of course, again, is where Alhaji is coming from. His claim is that it's too expensive and it should be cheaper than it is, and he wants to disintermediate in an effort to bring down those prices. There's a lot to unpack. We are limited in this brief conversation, but yeah, we'll touch on as much as we can.
Right, and I mean, speaking of previous efforts, right, by the government to crash prices of LPG, we know that in February 2024, the federal government did ban the export of LPG in a bid to stabilize prices. How effective was that bid?
So a good place to start would be to look at, how much of domestic demand are we able to meet domestically, specifically regarding NLNG now. Depending on who you ask, the data suggests that we are still having to import up to 60–65% to meet domestic demand. And again, placed against the backdrop of what I said earlier, that even this domestic demand is really too low, so 1.5 million metric tons per annum. So that's low enough in and of itself. You now have an even more difficult situation where we are not able to meet that demand domestically. So we're importing 65% of our domestic demand, 65% of our domestic demand currently. So the Dangote coming into the picture, and we have seen enough to suggest that potentially he can wipe out that entire import demand, if not immediately or in the medium term. It's a good thing to happen. It has sparked concerns, of monopoly and all of that. But I mean, personally, I'm thinking we're importing 65% of our demand now. One producer or one market player wants to come and replace that. Let it happen first. It's a good thing to happen anyways, and then we'll deal with the other issues, which I think may be blown out of proportion, to be honest. I did say initially that his ability to totally disintermediate and sell directly to consumers and thereby cutting off a large part of the supply chain now, who makes money out of this, that ability is in question. I don't really think it can happen, not anytime soon anyways. Yeah.
Interesting. As you have pointed out, there have been pushbacks to Dangote's proposal to intervene. Well, some may call it an intervention, some may call it an interruption in that sector. We have the former chairman of LPG and Natural Gas Downstream Group of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Godwin, saying collaboration is the way to go. Dangote will be frustrating players. How do you see Dangote's play in that sector frustrating players? And what would potential collaboration look like with Dangote and those who are currently operating in that sector and who, according to them, have built the sector with investors over time?
I think that collaboration is inevitable. Like I said earlier, even with PMS, we have seen collaboration, in terms of partnering with major off-takers. If you don't own the entire supply chain, the only way to get your product to market is to collaborate with those who are playing in that supply chain. This product can be transported or is being transported with trucks. At the end of the day, the trucks have to offload into some sort of storage infrastructure at distribution points, which already exist, which have current owners. So it's a supply chain, a national supply chain, and the only way you get the product to market is to collaborate. So like I said, some of the times we hear these news, all sorts of, I call them sound bites. We need to dig deeper, analyze it a bit more rigor, and separate the wheat from the chaff. The myth of this thing is that Dangote's ability to disintermediate in any kind of immediate sense is almost non-existent, to my knowledge.
All right. I mean, interesting thoughts there, and it's been interesting to see how this pans out. But looking at the role regulators can play to avoid a situation of monopoly, to ensure healthy competition, and perhaps even collaboration, how should regulators step in and perhaps mediate in this situation?
It's a difficult situation because, like I said, you're importing 65% of your local demand. Right. Ab initio, the ability to replace that import supply element with a domestic supply element, albeit one person or one supply player, is a good thing to happen. The question of fears of monopoly becomes a secondary issue. I think we have bigger problems to face right now, to be honest. It's an imperfect analogy, but I remember, the times of GSM and how the initial players, literally told us that per second billing was not possible, and then a player came into the market, with a very distinctive green green branding, and immediately demonstrated, that, hey, this thing is possible, and the market changed. So there's a sense in which Dangote's entry into this picture is actually an improvement in competition because he's competing with the import sources. Yeah, he's one local player, but like I said, he can't operate in complete on his own. He has to collaborate. So I'm really less worried about that. That's my view, though. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. You have spoken about production, especially compared to African counterparts. But let's come to the consumption side of things now. We are seeing, and according to data from MBS, right, previous report said that 67.8% of Nigerian households rely on firewood for cooking. People are shifting to more traditional fuels because of how unaffordable LPG, that is cooking gas, has become. Give us a picture of the pricing of cooking gas here in Nigeria, LPG, compared to our African counterparts. And is this a pricing problem? Is LPG, from your perspective and in comparison to our counterparts, unaffordable in Nigeria?
It's a good question, thank you. And so this is where data is important. If you look at the available data that I've seen, LPG prices are lowest in Nigeria, or are lower in Nigeria to our neighboring counterparts in the West African and Sub-Saharan African region. So you have a situation where our pricing is the lowest, but at the same time, our per capita consumption is even lower. It's not a good look, It speaks of poverty, and I don't know which other word to use. Somehow, on a per capita basis, our people are not able to afford this product, even though it is cheaper than with our neighbors. So that problem needs to be solved. I did mention, and again, like I said, there's a lot to unpack in this topic, and I won't pretend to be exhaustive in this attempt at analysis. But when you look at the supply chain and the infrastructure elements of it, you start to see that a large portion of the country may not be sufficiently addressed in the distribution infrastructure. These are things that, at the end of the day, contribute to cost, affordability, and ability to consume the product. And that's on one side. On the other side, you look at productivity as a whole. You look at per capita income and the inequality picture, and there's a lot to fix. That much I can say. Yeah.
And do you think that Dangote is starting from the right point? With that, is that a good starting point to fix that problem, or from what angle should we be attempting to find solutions to this problem?
I think that ab initio, the ability to supply domestically instead of importing and being at the mercy of the exchange rate is a good start, and inevitably will lead to some sort of price moderation. I am strongly convinced of this. So it is a good start. Also, when a player comes into the market like this, it shakes up the market a bit, and that's always a good thing. Like I said, and you may start to see some previous market inefficiencies coming to light. You may start to see parts of the value chain where some people may have been chopping just a bit too much, becoming more visible. All of this might contribute to lower prices down the line. But like I said, it's two things. Our prices are already lower than our neighbors, but our consumption is terribly low. So we need to fix our ability to afford it. But indeed, there's the potential for this new element to reduce prices. That's a short answer to it, and that's a good thing.
So it's more the purchasing power of the people than a price problem. Is that what you're saying?
Indeed, indeed. It's a good thing to reduce prices, yes, but we need to address the bigger problem. Purchasing power is just too low.
All right, well, we'll see how, that all pans out. But we know that in the immediate, August 1st is it August 15th, I believe, Dangote is set to deliver petrol, diesel, amongst others, directly to the consumers. What are you anticipating ahead of this move from Dangote? And how do you see this impacting his also proposed move to do the same thing with LPG?
It's a tough question because, again, I question that as the assumption or the claim. What does delivering directly to consumers exactly mean? As far as I know, Dangote does not own petrol stations at this time, So if you're talking about some kind of graduated disintermediation, where maybe you are cutting out one or two layers in the supply chain, okay, fine. At the end of the day, it's a market. The consumer is and should be king. At the same time, we need to preserve the integrity in quote of the market and be sure that there are no unfair practices and no unnecessary tendencies to monopoly. But left to me, in the bigger scheme of the problems we need to solve now, it's a lesser problem. For instance, with PMS, we have seen nothing to suggest at this initial time that was the fear of a monopoly is that they have too much control and that sometime in the future they can jack up prices and we will have no choice. It's such a distant, eventuality that to me it's the least of our problems right now. Let's develop industrial capacity. Let's develop a domestic ability to meet our needs. And to exceed that and to export, and let's signal to the world, that Nigeria is able to have this kind of capacity.
All right, I think that's a great starting point, developing industrial capacity. And at the end of the day, with all these shifts in the oil and gas sector, hopefully it's a consumer that benefits. Thank you very much for your time and perspective, Bolarinwa Durojaiye, oil and gas technologist.